And that requires Jesus' followers to be both detached and radically engaged in their own culture, to offer both glad affirmation and biting criticism when necessary. As a foreign missionary from an American background, I feel like the word missions is having a crisis in the West. Now, in the academic world, one of the new buzzwords is post-colonial. And the basic premise of post-colonialism is this: if you're old and white, we don't want to listen to you. You've been the majority opinion for the last 200 years. Now, I agree that we need the perspective of friends and experts from diverse cultural backgrounds. And they can help sharpen and correct our perspective and help us better understand this world that we live in. And yes, the church does need to address and own up to the atrocities that have been done in Jesus' name, even in the history of foreign missions. But the post-colonial framework is presenting missions as nothing more than imposing Western culture on the rest of the world. Now, is this really the case? On the other hand, even the post-colonial thinkers cannot deny the good fruit that has been accomplished by Christian foreign missions. The work of missionaries in India to stop the practice of sati, which is the burning of a widow alive on her husband's funeral pyre. And also the work of Christian missionaries to break the cycle of the caste system, which kept people away from certain opportunities just because of the manner of their birth. These are both seen by the post-colonial world as good things. So in our post-Christendom, post-colonial, cancel culture world, how is a Christian supposed to think about the gospel and culture and missions? Now, enter Leslie Newbigin, an Anglican missionary to India who, upon returning to Britain, realized that what he was doing as a missionary in India needed to be done in British churches. Now, when it comes to the intersection of the gospel and culture in regards to missions, Newbigin gives us both an affirmation and a warning that help us navigate our way forward. Now, Newbigin defines culture as the sum total ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. Now, in other words, culture is just what we do as humans. And yet, Newbigin also reminds us that human culture is simply the way in which human societies order their corporate life, and as such, it is corrupted by sin. In the absence of God as our true source of ultimate identity, we humans, we resort to culture to tell us who we are. Now think of Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel, where people say, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Sin corrupts all things, even the beautiful things we culture makers do and create. We leave God out of our culture. We use culture to divide and to separate. And yes, we can even use culture to destroy each other. So in light of the culture, or in light of the gospel, is culture good or bad? That is the question. In the light of the gospel, is culture good or bad? Now, the resounding answer is a very paradoxical yes. What do we do then? Christians have typically fallen into two traps. One, we want to control the culture. The world would be better if we were in charge. But this is the mindset that fueled the Crusades and other such horrible results that were started with supposedly good intentions. Now, the other trap is just to create an alternative culture. So we have Christian bands that sound just like the top 40 playlist. We have subpar Christian movies that we think will be better if there's a Newsboys concert at the end, and we try to convince the rest of the world that our alternative culture is just as good as theirs, maybe even better, even though we secretly fear that might not be the case. Now, maybe the way forward is something entirely different, something the ancient Chinese philosopher Confucius would have called the middle path. We don't uncritically embrace culture. We don't wantonly just toss culture aside. We as Christians, we redeem culture. We don't use Jesus as a club to beat other cultures into submission. And we don't just offer Jesus as an alternative culture. We reveal Jesus as the fulfillment of culture, the very center of a culture, the true hope of every culture's longing and desire. And that requires Jesus' followers to be both detached and radically engaged in their own culture, to offer both glad affirmation and biting criticism when necessary. And as we bring Christ to another culture through missions, reveal him as the fulfillment, we need to tread that same middle path. We were made by God to be culture makers and represent him on earth. A creative God made us in his image, so why wouldn't we be creative? Why wouldn't we make art and music and tell stories and pass all of these things on to others? There's beauty and truth in other cultures that we can take to heart and we can learn much from. We rejoice in the beauty and the truth that is already there, and we challenge what is opposite to God and his commands. And we begin to find a unique cultural expression of the church that can now reach more and more people with the message of the gospel that sets people free. This is what the post-colonials don't expect. And this is what Christian missionaries have been doing ever since the formation of the church.